Do you know what's watching you when you're alone? That question had haunted Ryan ever since he saw the lake for the first time. It was a place locals whispered about but rarely visited, an old glacial basin deep in the woods, hidden by crooked pines and wrapped in constant silence. They called it Mirror Lake, though it was not on any official map. It didn't need to be. Everyone in the small town of Eversfield knew the stories. The lake's surface never rippled, even when the wind screamed through the trees. Birds never flew over it, and sometimes, when you stared into it long enough, you didn't like what looked back. Ryan wasn't a believer in campfire tales. At least, not until the night he decided to go alone. The air was cool when he parked his truck on the dirt path, flashlight in hand, the forest pressing in around him. Branches rattled, though the wind was strangely absent. His boots crunched over roots and fallen leaves as he followed the trail down to the clearing where the lake spread out like polished obsidian. The water was impossibly still. Not a single ripple distorted its glassy skin. Ryan crouched near the bank, shining his flashlight across the surface. It was flawless, like a sheet of black glass. He leaned closer. And there he was. His reflection stared back with unnatural sharpness. Every detail was crisp, the curve of his jaw, the crease in his brow, even the tiny scar near his lip. Yet something was off. The reflection's eyes seemed a shade darker, the pupils dilated as though he were staring into a void. Ryan blinked. His reflection didn't. He chuckled nervously and rubbed his eyes. Great. I'm already imagining things. But when he looked again, the reflection was smiling. Ryan stumbled backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. His heart hammered. The reflection wasn't just a trick of light. He was sure of it. Because he hadn't smiled. He hadn't moved at all. The smile vanished the second he blinked, returning to a mirror of his terrified expression. He stared for a long time, but nothing else happened. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe stress. Maybe his mind playing tricks. That's what he told himself as he hiked back to his truck, though every step carried the weight of unseen eyes watching from below the surface. The following morning, he couldn't shake it. He sat in the diner, sipping bitter coffee, trying to focus on his laptop. He was a freelance writer, after all, supposed to be working on an article about rural myths. The lake would have been perfect material if it hadn't unsettled him so badly. Don't go back there. Ryan looked up. The voice belonged to Marlene, the diner's owner, a sharp-eyed woman who had lived in Eversfield her whole life. She set a plate of toast on his table but leaned closer, lowering her voice. I saw your truck last night. Near Mirror Lake. He forced a laugh. Yeah. Just checking it out. What's the big deal? It's just a lake. Her expression darkened. That's what everyone says before it shows them something they can't unsee. Ryan frowned. You believe those stories? Marlene didn't answer. She just placed the coffee pot down harder than necessary and walked away. By the second night, curiosity outweighed his fear. He returned to Mirror Lake, telling himself he was gathering material. The forest seemed even quieter this time. Not a cricket, not a bird. Just silence so deep it pressed against his ears. When he reached the clearing, the lake was waiting. Smooth. Perfect. He stepped closer, clutching his flashlight, and stared down. His reflection stared back. Only this time, it didn't mimic him. Ryan tilted his head left. The reflection tilted right. He lifted his hand. The reflection lowered his. Cold panic flooded his chest. Ryan forced a laugh, voice shaky. Okay, this is officially insane. The reflection smiled again. This time, wider. Its teeth gleamed unnaturally white in the moonlight, stretching too far across its face. Ryan staggered back. His flashlight beam shook, darting across the trees. For a split second, he thought he saw movement just beneath the water, a shadow shifting against the perfect stillness. The reflection raised a hand slowly, pressing its palm against the inside of the water's surface as though it were a window. Ryan froze. His breath caught in his throat. The thing in the lake was trying to touch him. And then, in a voice so faint it seemed to echo inside his skull rather than his ears, it whispered, "You don't belong here." Ryan bolted. He didn't remember how he got back to the truck, only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the sensation that something was following, gliding silently behind him. He slammed the door shut and tore down the dirt road, headlights slashing through the night. But even as he drove, his eyes darted to the rearview mirror. His reflection in the mirror wasn't sitting still. It was smiling. Ryan didn't sleep that night. He sat in bed, eyes fixed on the faint square of moonlight spilling through his curtains, every creak of the house making him jolt upright. The worst part wasn't the memory of the reflection smiling, or even the whisper that had curled inside his skull like smoke. It was the certainty that, when he glanced in the bathroom mirror earlier, his reflection had been a second too slow. He told himself it was exhaustion. Stress. The brain playing tricks. He wanted to believe it. But belief crumbled when reality kept scratching at the edges. By morning, his nerves were shot. He staggered into the diner again, hair unkempt, eyes bloodshot. Marlene spotted him the second he sat down. She didn't ask if he wanted coffee, just poured it, black and steaming, setting it in front of him like medicine. "You went back," she said flatly. Ryan stiffened. "How do you?" "I know the look." She slid into the booth opposite him, hands folded. Her knuckles were pale, her voice low. "It started with my brother. Then others. Everyone who looks into that lake too long sees something they shouldn't." Ryan swallowed hard. "What happens to them?" Marlene's eyes flicked around the diner, making sure no one was listening. "They stop being themselves. At first, it's little things, forgetting words, losing track of time, feeling like something's moving in their shadow. Then one day, they're gone. But you still see them around town." She leaned closer. "Only it isn't them anymore." Ryan laughed nervously, though the sound cracked. "That sounds like a ghost story." Her face didn't move. "It's worse." Ryan tried to shake her words. He left the diner, drove around town, even sat at the library for hours scrolling through old town archives. But the more he looked, the more gaps he found. There were people in the old photos, smiling families, fishermen by the lake, children playing near the pines. But names didn't match, dates were off, and some faces appeared again and again. Not aging. Not changing. Always on the edge of the frame, always watching. By dusk, Ryan's hands were trembling as he turned the last brittle page. He closed the book, his skin crawling. Maybe Marlene wasn't exaggerating. That night, against every shred of reason, Ryan returned to Mirror Lake. It was as though the place had a hook in his chest, reeling him back no matter how hard he resisted. The woods seemed even darker now, the silence thicker, as though the world itself were holding its breath. When he reached the water's edge, the surface gleamed like polished obsidian under the pale moon. His heart pounded. He forced himself to kneel, flashlight trembling in his grip, and peer into the water. His reflection was waiting. It grinned the moment he appeared, as if it had been anticipating him. This time, its movements weren't even trying to mimic his. When Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, the reflection raised its hand and dragged 2 fingers slowly across its throat, leaving an invisible red line behind. Ryan gasped, stumbling back. His flashlight beam caught something beneath the surface, a ripple, faint but visible, like something shifting under the glassy skin. And then he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the forest was still. No. It was coming from below the water. A whisper, too faint to make out, threading through the silence like a needle pulling at his sanity. He leaned closer despite himself, straining to hear. The voice grew clearer. Countless whispers overlapping, each word rasping against the other like dry leaves in a storm. He caught fragments. Take him. Replace. The others still waiting. Ryan clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices didn't stop. They weren't outside. They were inside his skull. His reflection's mouth moved along with the whispers, smiling wider and wider until the lips split into something grotesque. Why me? Ryan choked, his voice trembling. For the first time, the reflection answered directly. Because you looked back. Panic surged through Ryan's chest. He scrambled away from the water, lungs burning, every nerve screaming at him to run. But as he staggered toward the trees, he froze. There were footprints. Fresh ones, pressed into the damp soil along the bank. They were his size. His exact tread. And they led away from the water, deeper into the woods, as if he had already walked this path. A sound echoed behind him, soft, deliberate footsteps. Ryan spun around. The water was empty. The surface flawless once more. But when he looked back at the footprints leading into the trees, they were no longer just impressions. They were wet. As if something had climbed out of the lake and was still dripping. The whispers swelled, rushing into his head like a flood. His vision blurred. His reflection's voice hissed inside him, low and triumphant. You can't outrun yourself. Ryan didn't remember driving home. One moment he was staring at those wet footprints bleeding into the dirt, and the next he was slamming his front door shut, locking it, bolting it, as though thin slabs of wood and cheap metal could keep something like that out. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temples, and yet he felt colder than he'd ever been. He didn't turn on any lights. The darkness felt safer somehow, as though illumination might reveal too much. He sat in his living room for what could have been minutes or hours, staring at the black window panes, half expecting his reflection to wink back from the glass. But eventually, exhaustion hit him like a wave. He collapsed on the couch, still in his clothes, and fell into a shallow, restless sleep. When he woke, sunlight was bleeding faintly through the blinds. For a moment, the world felt normal, birds outside, the hum of a car engine passing by, the ordinary creak of the house settling. But then his gaze flicked to the coffee table. His boots sat there, mud drying on the soles. Only he didn't remember bringing them inside. He decided not to go back to the lake. Not today. Not ever, if he could help it. Instead, he went into town, hoping the company of other people would shake the paranoia clinging to him like cobwebs. But the moment he stepped into the diner again, dread pooled in his stomach. Something was wrong. The room looked the same, red vinyl booths, chrome trim, smell of frying bacon, but the people were off. The waitress, Cindy, who had always been bright and chatty, stood near the counter with her order pad dangling loosely in her hand, eyes glazed as though she'd forgotten what she was supposed to do. The cook in the back flipped pancakes in a mechanical rhythm, movements too precise, too rehearsed. And Marlene. Marlene wasn't behind the counter. Ryan slid into a booth, trying to act normal, though his pulse hammered in his ears. Cindy drifted over, smile stretched too wide, too forced. Coffee, she asked. Her voice was flat, like she was reciting lines from a script she no longer understood. Ryan nodded quickly, avoiding her eyes. When she walked away, he noticed her reflection in the window. It wasn't walking in sync. Ryan's breath hitched. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. The reflection's head tilted, lips curling in a smile that Cindy herself didn't make. It was watching him. Only him. He shot to his feet, nearly knocking the table over. Where's Marlene? He asked, too loudly. The entire diner seemed to freeze. Every head turned toward him at once. Eyes, dull, glassy, unblinking. A dozen stares locking onto him with unnatural unity. Cindy tilted her head the way her reflection had just done. Marlene doesn't come here anymore. Ryan fled. He didn't care if he looked insane. He pushed out the door, sprinting down the sidewalk, ignoring the way shopkeepers and pedestrians turned their heads to watch him with that same vacant stare. The town didn't feel like a town anymore, it felt like a stage, with actors who had forgotten how to pretend to be human. He ducked into the library, the only place he'd found that still seemed quiet. Real. The librarian, Mrs. Fowler, peered up from behind her desk, startled by his entrance. "Ryan," she asked softly. "You look pale. Sit down." She was old, frail, her wrinkled hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses. But her eyes, thank God, were clear. Human. He stumbled into a chair, chest heaving. "Something's wrong. With the people here. They don't act right." Mrs. Fowler's face tightened. She leaned closer. "You went to the lake, didn't you?" Ryan nodded, unable to speak. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I warned them not to build the town here. My grandfather told me about the water, how it wasn't natural, how it remembers. It doesn't just reflect, it takes. Always has. But no one listened." Ryan's skin crawled. "What do you mean, takes?" The old woman's eyes flicked to the nearest window. "Not everyone you see walking these streets belongs to themselves anymore. Some of them are still, down there. At the bottom." A shiver rattled through Ryan's body. The memory of those whispers under the water clawed at his mind. Mrs. Fowler grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her voice dropped to a rasp. "If you've seen your reflection move, it's already chosen you." Ryan staggered back, chair scraping loudly against the floor. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but every fiber of his being screamed that she was telling the truth. He mumbled something incoherent and fled the library, ignoring her calls after him. Outside, the town no longer looked like his town. Too many eyes followed him, too many smiles lingered a fraction too long. The world had shifted, and now he could see the seams, the cracks in the play. By the time he reached his car, his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the keys. He forced himself inside, locking the doors. His reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, lips twitching upward in a grin. Ryan snapped the mirror backward, unable to stand it. He slammed the car into gear and sped away, heart pounding, mind screaming. There was only one place to go. Back to the lake. Because deep down, he knew Mrs. Fowler was right. And if he didn't confront it soon, he wouldn't be Ryan anymore. The drive back to the lake felt endless, though Ryan barely remembered steering. The road wound through dense clusters of pine, their branches arching overhead like blackened cathedral beams, shutting out the daylight. His headlights cut tunnels through the darkness, but even that pale light seemed swallowed, eaten away by the forest. His grip on the wheel was iron-tight, knuckles white, and yet the thought that kept drilling through his mind wasn't, "Why am I doing this? But what if it's already too late?" When the trees finally opened, the lake spread before him, smooth and glassy under the twilight sky. It looked tranquil, beautiful even, the kind of postcard-perfect scenery people would drive hours to see. But Ryan couldn't see beauty anymore. To him, it was a mouth, black, endless, waiting. He parked near the water's edge, gravel crunching under his tires, and stepped out, the air sharp with the metallic tang of wet earth. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to turn back. Instead, he walked closer, shoes sinking slightly into the damp soil, until the reflections shimmered into focus. At first, they were normal. Trees mirrored in perfect symmetry. A scatter of clouds above duplicated in the depths. And his own figure, pale and thin, standing at the edge. But then it moved. Not much, a tilt of the head, a slow curling of the lips, but enough to freeze his lungs. His reflection raised its hand slowly, as if pressing against invisible glass, palm to palm with his own. Its eyes glistened in the water, not dull mirrors of his own but alive, hungry. Ryan stumbled back, heart hammering. The surface of the water rippled once, though no wind stirred. The reflection leaned closer, its face stretching into a grin far wider than his muscles could ever allow. And then, without warning, its mouth moved. No sound came. Just lips forming words. "Come down." Ryan shook his head violently, breath ragged. "No, no, no, no." The water darkened. Shapes began to stir beneath the glassy surface, faces flickering into existence. Men. Women. Children. Their eyes bulged, mouths opening in silent screams, their features distorted by the pressure of the water. Hands clawed upward, smearing against the underside of the surface like bugs trapped in amber. Ryan staggered back another step, but the waterline seemed closer now, as if the ground itself had tilted toward it. A nauseating pull coiled in his stomach, urging him forward, whispering that it would be easier to let go, easier to step in and stop resisting. A sound sliced through the night, a splash. Something broke the water's surface just a few feet away, sending ripples across the mirror. Ryan's head snapped toward it. It was him. Another Ryan pulled itself up from the lake, water streaming off its body in sheets. Its movements were stiff at first, jerky, like a puppet forced to mimic life. But then it straightened, dripping wet, eyes burning with cruel intelligence. It wore his face, his clothes, his crooked smile, but its skin was pale, almost translucent, veins visible like spiderwebs beneath. Ryan's chest clenched. He stumbled backward, tripping over a root, landing hard on the dirt. The other Ryan stepped onto the shore, water running off him, soaking into the ground. It spoke. "You don't belong here anymore." The voice was his, but warped, deeper, carrying an echo that seemed to come from the water itself. The thing crouched slightly, head cocked like a predator studying prey. "You felt it, didn't you?" The truth in their eyes. "This town isn't yours. It's ours." Ryan scrambled backward on hands and feet, heart jackhammering. "Stay away from me." The reflection double tilted its head further, grinning. "Why fight? You've seen what happens. They'll forget you. Replace you. You'll be nothing but a shadow under the surface. But me," it tapped its chest with wet fingers. "I'll live. I'll breathe. I'll be you. And no one will ever know." Ryan's stomach lurched, bile rising in his throat. He wanted to run, but his limbs felt heavy, weighed down by invisible chains. The other Ryan took another step closer, water trailing behind it in black streaks, its smile widening unnaturally. "You can't win. The lake doesn't give back what it takes." Suddenly, from deep beneath the water, came a chorus of voices, dozens, hundreds, whispering in unison. "Join us. Join us. Join us." Ryan clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was in his head, worming its way deeper, drowning his own thoughts. He screamed, forcing his body upright, legs wobbling beneath him. The other Ryan lunged. Ryan bolted, sprinting toward his car, adrenaline shoving him forward despite the weight in his legs. He could hear footsteps behind him, wet slaps against the dirt, closer and closer. His vision blurred with panic, the edges of the world bending, the pull of the lake tugging at his spine. He threw himself into the car, slamming the door just as pale hands smacked against the window. The reflection double's face pressed against the glass, grinning wide, teeth too sharp, eyes too bright. Water smeared across the window like blood. "Soon," it whispered, voice muffled but clear. "Soon, you won't fight anymore." Ryan roared the engine to life and tore out of the lot, gravel spraying, tires screaming. He didn't look back. Couldn't. The words still rang in his head like a curse. "You won't fight anymore. Ryan didn't remember the drive home. One moment, the car was clawing its way out of the forest, engine whining as though the vehicle itself feared what followed. The next, he was slamming the door to his small apartment shut, pressing his back against it like a barricade. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temples, but even in the safety of his home, he felt no relief. He could still smell the lake water, sharp and brackish, clinging to him like it had seeped into his pores. For hours, he sat on the couch with every light blazing, unable to close his eyes. Every time his lids grew heavy, he would see the reflections grin, the pale face pressing against glass, whispering its promise. He told himself he wouldn't sleep, but exhaustion is a cruel thing, it doesn't ask for permission. At some point, his head dipped, his breathing slowed, and he surrendered. When he woke, the clock read 9:07 a.m. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, warming the floor in pale stripes. For a moment, he felt normal again, until his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He reached for it with trembling hands and froze at the notification. "Thanks for last night. You were different. I liked it. Dinner again soon?" The message was from Claire. His stomach turned to ice. He hadn't seen Claire in weeks, not since they argued about his drinking and she stormed out of his life. He hadn't spoken to her. Hadn't seen her. Not last night. Not in months. His mouth went dry. He tapped the message open, staring at it, rereading until the words lost meaning. Slowly, his thumb hovered over the call button. His pulse pounded in his ears as it rang once, twice, 3 times, then a voice answered. "Hey," Claire said cheerfully. "Didn't expect you to call so soon." Ryan's throat tightened. "Claire? What are you talking about?" A pause. "What do you mean?" "About dinner. About last night. Don't play dumb, Ryan. You were different. Nicer. Calmer. Like the old you." He couldn't breathe. His hand shook around the phone. "Claire. I wasn't with you last night." The silence that followed was long, brittle. Then Claire laughed, but it was nervous, wavering. "What kind of game is this?" "I swear to God," Ryan said, voice breaking, "I wasn't there. Whoever you were with, it wasn't me." She scoffed, but he could hear fear creeping into her tone. "Ryan, don't. I was looking right at you. We had dinner, we talked for hours, God, I shouldn't even have to say this. It was you." Ryan's vision blurred. He whispered into the phone, almost choking on the words. "It wasn't me. It was him." Claire's voice faltered. "Who?" But Ryan couldn't explain. He ended the call, tossing the phone onto the couch like it was infected. His whole body trembled, nausea writhing in his stomach. The reflection. It wasn't just following him, it was already living his life. The rest of the day passed in a haze of paranoia. Ryan checked every mirror in his apartment, every reflective surface, terrified of seeing movement that wasn't his own. He unplugged the television, covered the bathroom mirror with a towel, and avoided the kitchen window, where the glass glared back too clearly. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He swore he heard footsteps outside his door, soft and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth, waiting. By evening, hunger gnawed at him, forcing him into the kitchen. He reached for a can of soup, and froze. On the counter sat a folded napkin, something he was certain hadn't been there before. With dread curdling in his gut, he unfolded it. 3 words were scrawled in wet ink, the letters jagged and smudged like they'd been written with trembling hands. "She likes me." The napkin slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the tile. His stomach flipped. It had been here. In his home. Sitting at his table. Touching his things. He backed out of the kitchen, shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, no." His eyes darted to the door, half expecting it to burst open. But it didn't need to. The danger wasn't out there anymore, it was already inside his life. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat awake on the couch, a knife clutched in his hands, staring at the darkened windows. Every creak of the building made him flinch. Every gust of wind rattling the glass felt like fingers tapping for entry. At some point, he realized the faintest sound was threading through the silence, a low, distorted hum, like a voice speaking from underwater. It was coming from the bathroom. Ryan's blood turned to ice. He stood slowly, knife trembling in his grip, an inch toward the sound. The towel he'd draped over the mirror had slipped, just barely, exposing a sliver of glass. And in that sliver, he saw it, his reflection, standing perfectly still, lips moving soundlessly in a mocking imitation of prayer. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The reflection's eyes snapped up to meet his, alive, aware, and its lips curved into that same crooked grin. Then it mouthed 3 words, deliberate and slow, pressing them into his mind like a curse. "I am you." The light above flickered. The mirror rattled in its frame. And then, in a sudden violent motion, the reflection raised its fist and slammed it against the inside of the glass. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the surface, the sound like a gunshot in the tiny bathroom. Ryan staggered back, nearly dropping the knife, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The reflection's grin widened through the cracks, its features warping in the broken shards. And then, silence. Stillness. Nothing but his own pale, terrified face staring back through fractured glass. Ryan fled the bathroom, slamming the door shut, back pressed against it as though that thin wood could keep the thing at bay. His mind raced. It wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was moving. It was acting. It was becoming him, piece by piece. And if he didn't stop it soon, no one would know the difference. Morning sunlight did little to wash away the terror of the night before. Ryan hadn't slept, not even for a moment. His nerves were stretched thin, every sound magnified to unbearable levels. When he finally cracked the bathroom door open, the mirror was exactly as he had left it, fractured, spiderwebbed with cracks, his own pale face warped across the glass. The reflection didn't move. It looked ordinary now, like any broken mirror. But Ryan knew better. It was waiting. He showered in the kitchen sink, avoiding the bathroom entirely, and dressed in yesterday's clothes. A suffocating need to escape the apartment clawed at him, but the outside world no longer promised safety. Still, he couldn't stay locked inside forever, not if the reflection had already found ways to bleed into his life. The streets felt uncanny that morning, as though the town itself had tilted slightly off balance. Faces he'd known for years looked strangely unfamiliar. People's eyes lingered on him too long. Some smiled in faint recognition, like they were greeting an old friend, while others frowned in quiet suspicion. Ryan's gut twisted tighter with every step toward the grocery store. Inside, he grabbed a basket and kept his head down, forcing himself to act normal. But halfway down the cereal aisle, a voice startled him. "Forgot something yesterday?" Ryan turned. The cashier, a young man with acne scars and heavy eyelids, leaned against the shelves with arms crossed. His tone was casual, but there was an edge beneath it. Ryan blinked at him. "What?" The cashier smirked faintly. "You came through my line last night. Bought, what was it? 2 bottles of wine. Box of chocolates. Same stuff you used to get for that girl you dated. Claire, right?" The blood drained from Ryan's face. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, words refusing to form. I wasn't here yesterday." The cashier's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? You were standing right in front of me. Even told me to keep the change. Thought it was weird, you never do that." Ryan stumbled back a step, cereal box slipping from his hands and clattering against the floor. His pulse hammered in his ears. That wasn't me. The cashier's smirk vanished. For the first time, he looked unsettled, like maybe he realized something was wrong. His gaze flicked up and down the aisle as though suddenly uncertain of what stood in front of him. Ryan left the groceries behind and bolted, shoving past shoppers, ignoring their startled mutters. The bell above the door rang sharply as he burst onto the sidewalk, gulping down cool air that tasted no less suffocating. His mind churned. It wasn't just Claire anymore. The reflection was moving freely, living for him, sliding into his routines like it had always belonged. And people believed it. By the time he reached his apartment, he was drenched in sweat. His hands shook as he turned the lock, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, sure that someone, or something, was following him. He pushed inside, locked the door, and collapsed against it, chest heaving. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. He stood slowly, knife still on the coffee table where he had left it the night before. He picked it up, gripping it tight, then moved through each room. Bedroom, empty. Closet, empty. Bathroom. He stopped. The towel was gone from the mirror. Ryan froze in the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. The mirror was still cracked, but the reflection inside wasn't his. It stood taller, straighter, its grin stretching unnaturally wide across broken glass. And in its hand, it held something, a napkin. The same napkin Ryan had found on his kitchen counter. The reflection raised it slowly, pressing it against the glass, smearing faint inked words so Ryan could barely make them out. But he didn't need to read them again. He already knew what they said. She likes me. The knife nearly slipped from Ryan's sweaty palm. His legs trembled, threatening to give out beneath him. What do you want? He whispered, though the question came out hoarse, broken. The reflection tilted its head, grin never fading, then pressed its free hand flat against the glass. The cracks around its palm pulsed faintly, as if the barrier was thinning. It mouthed something slowly, deliberately, dragging each syllable across Ryan's mind like claws on a chalkboard. I want everything. The mirror shuddered in its frame, a faint rattling sound that grew louder, sharper, like bones grinding. Ryan staggered back, eyes wide, until his back hit the hallway wall. For a heartbeat, he thought the glass might actually burst, that the reflection would come clawing into his world. But then, it stopped. The grin, the words, the movement, vanished. He was staring at himself again. Or at least, he thought he was. Ryan couldn't tell anymore. He slid to the floor, knife slipping from his grip, breath ragged and uneven. The apartment walls seemed to press in around him, suffocating. He was losing control of his own life, his own identity. The reflection wasn't just imitating him anymore, it was better than him. Kinder. More charming. More alive. And if it kept going, soon everyone in town would prefer the other Ryan. The thought was unbearable. He had to do something. He had to go back to the lake. If this had started there, maybe it could end there. Maybe the water still held answers. Or maybe it held the grave waiting for him. As he packed a bag with trembling hands, flashlight, rope, a crowbar, Ryan drove with the headlights off for most of the trip. If the reflection was trying to replace him behind drywall, then maybe the only way to stop approaching headlights made his stomach drop. Every streetlight felt like a spotlight catching him in the act of running. He couldn't shake the image of his reflection shopping at the grocery store, chatting with the cashier, handing over money with a smile that wasn't his. That thing had walked freely in his skin, and people had believed it without hesitation. Maybe even preferred it. The thought dug into him like a splinter lodged deep under the nail. The lake was only 15 miles from town, yet the drive stretched on endlessly, road after winding road through patches of dark forest. The deeper he went, the fewer signs of life appeared. No gas stations, no glowing windows of late-night diners, just endless trees and the hum of insects. When the road finally narrowed into a gravel path that curved sharply downhill, Ryan cut the engine and coasted the last 100 yards, heart pounding. Moonlight painted the surface of the lake in shifting silver. It looked peaceful, almost holy, its glassy reflection perfectly unbroken. But Ryan knew better. He remembered standing on the bank nights ago, when the water had shown him a grin that wasn't his. He remembered how the ripples had twisted unnaturally, how the reflection had seemed alive. He parked the car at the edge of the treeline and stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel. A crowbar hung from his backpack, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to leave the lake to its silence. But he couldn't. The reflection had already stepped into his life, threading itself into his reality like a parasite. If he didn't fight it here, now, then he would lose everything. The air grew colder as he approached the shoreline. A damp, earthy smell seeped into his lungs, heavy with rot. The water glimmered under the moon, perfect as a mirror. Too perfect. Not a single ripple stirred, not even from the night breeze. Ryan crouched at the edge, flashlight beam trembling across the dark surface. His face stared back at him, pale and wide-eyed, but behind that familiar image was something else, something subtle, like a shadow just out of frame. He leaned closer. The reflection leaned too, but not in sync. A fraction of a second too late. Ryan's stomach lurched. "I know what you're doing," he whispered. "I know what you want." The reflection smiled. It wasn't a twitch of lips. It wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, creeping smile that spread across the water's surface. Ryan stumbled back, nearly losing his footing on the rocks. His breath came fast and shallow. "No, you don't get to have me. You don't get to take my life." He gripped the crowbar in both hands, raised it high, and swung hard into the water. The surface erupted, spraying cold droplets across his face, but the reflection didn't shatter. The ripples spread unnaturally slow, and through them he could still see that smile, unbroken, unbothered, like glass beneath the water's skin. Ryan swung again, and again, screaming with the effort, his throat raw. Still the reflection stared up at him, patient, amused, untouchable. His strength gave out, and he fell to his knees on the damp ground, gasping. The crowbar clattered beside him. The water stilled, smoothing into a flawless mirror once more. And now the reflection didn't just smile. It raised a hand. Ryan froze. His reflection's palm pressed flat against the water's surface from below, as though there were glass separating them. Then came the sound, a soft tapping. Like fingers knocking politely against a window pane. Tap. 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 Ryan's mouth went dry. The reflection's lips moved, mouthing words in perfect clarity, though no sound crossed the water. "Let me out." The tapping grew louder, urgent, until the surface of the lake trembled with each strike. Ryan staggered back, but his boots slipped on the slick earth. His flashlight beam danced wildly, catching the distorted grin in shards of light. Then, suddenly, silence. The water stilled. The reflection was gone. Ryan's pulse thundered in his ears. He stood frozen for what felt like hours, waiting, listening. Then a sound broke the silence behind him. Leaves crunching. Footsteps. He spun, flashlight jerking toward the treeline. At first, he saw nothing. Then a shape stepped forward into the beam. His own face stared back at him. His own body, standing there in the flesh, clothes dry and unrumpled, skin pale but smiling. The reflection had stepped free. Ryan stumbled backward toward the lake, his chest tightening with panic. No, that's not possible. The double tilted its head, the exact same way Ryan had seen it do in the mirror. Its grin widened. "You brought me here." The voice was his. Same tone, same cadence. But deeper somehow, weighted with something hollow and cruel. Ryan shook his head violently, gripping the knife tighter. Stay away from me. The double stepped closer, moonlight glinting off its eyes. Why would I hurt you? I'm you. I just want what's already mine. The lake behind Ryan rippled, a subtle sucking sound rising from its depths, like something was waiting below. The double reached out a hand, calm, inviting. Let's make it easy. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps. He realized in that moment there was nowhere to run, no escape. The thing had been waiting for him all along, and now it was out of the water, standing on solid ground. And the worst part, when Ryan finally screamed into the night, the sound that came out of his throat didn't sound like him at all. Ryan's scream tore out of him, ragged and alien, a sound that belonged to something other than himself. The noise echoed over the water, bouncing off the trees, returning to him warped and unfamiliar. He clutched at his throat, horrified, but the double only smiled wider, tilting its head in eerie curiosity, as though it were enjoying the performance. The knife trembled in Ryan's grip, sweat slicking the handle. His double took another deliberate step closer, each movement fluid and natural, the kind of easy stride that betrayed ownership of a body. Ryan's body. You don't belong out here, the double said softly, voice steady and calm, like a brother gently scolding a sibling. You've always known it, haven't you? Always felt out of place, like you were a shadow in your own life. Ryan's stomach twisted. The words hit too close. He had always felt that way, like a visitor in his own skin, like his reflection carried more weight than he did. But he refused to let the thought take root. Shut up, he hissed, staggering backward until his heels kissed the damp edge of the lake. The cold water lapped at his boots, a subtle invitation. The double stopped just short of arm's reach. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, not like lanterns but like something reflecting a light that wasn't there. This isn't about hurting you. It's about balance. You've taken enough time. It's my turn. Ryan's panic clawed higher in his chest. He could feel the lake behind him, pulling, whispering in currents only his skin could hear. He pictured the surface splitting, arms dragging him down. His knife felt useless, pathetic, against something that had already walked out of water and into the world. Still, he raised it, his knuckles white. You're not me. You'll never be me. The double's smile didn't falter. Funny. That's exactly what the last one said. Ryan's blood ran cold. The words echoed in his skull like a death knell. The last one. The thought bloomed with horrifying implications. This had happened before. The lake had done this before. Maybe dozens of times. Maybe hundreds. Every reflection that broke free replaced the original, stepping neatly into their life while the real one. Ryan's breath caught. He didn't want to imagine what happened to the real ones. The double moved faster than Ryan expected, lunging forward. Ryan slashed wildly, the blade grazing his twin's arm. But instead of bleeding, the wound seeped water, dripping thick and dark onto the dirt. The double didn't flinch. It grabbed Ryan's wrist, squeezing until his fingers spasmed and the knife clattered to the ground. Ryan cried out, thrashing, but the strength in that grip was inhuman, unyielding, like steel soaked in water. His double leaned close, so close their noses nearly touched. Ryan could smell it now, damp, earthy, the stench of stagnant water that had never seen sunlight. I'm not going to kill you, it whispered. That would be too kind. You'll be kept. Just like the others. The lake rippled behind Ryan, answering the words. Something stirred beneath the surface, a rolling swell that carried weight, as if something massive circled below. The whispers grew louder in his ears, not from outside, but inside, like voices bubbling through his veins. Ryan twisted violently, wrenching himself free long enough to stumble sideways. He grabbed the crowbar lying in the dirt and swung it blindly. The metal connected with a sickening crunch. His double's head snapped to the side, jaw hanging oddly for a moment before snapping back into place with a wet pop. "Don't fight me," the double hissed, voice warping now, reverberating in tones that weren't human. "The lake always wins." Ryan swung again, screaming with desperate rage. The crowbar passed clean through, like hitting smoke that had the shape of flesh. Water splattered across him, cold as ice, soaking his shirt and burning his skin with chill. The double laughed, a low, guttural sound that bubbled, as though it came from the bottom of the lake. Ryan's body felt heavy, too heavy, as if the water soaking into his skin carried weight. His arms sagged, his knees weakened. The reflection stood tall, untouchable, head cocked in mock sympathy. "You feel it now, don't you? The pull. The truth." Ryan staggered toward the car, his mind a blur of survival instinct. If he could just get in, just drive, get away from the lake's pull. He stumbled across the gravel, lungs burning, body trembling. Behind him, the double's voice called out, chillingly calm. "Run all you want. You can't escape what you are." Ryan threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. His shaking hands fumbled with the keys, heart hammering so violently he thought his ribs would snap. The engine roared to life, headlights blazing across the lake. For a moment, he thought he'd done it, he'd broken free. He jammed the car into reverse, gravel spitting behind him. But then his eyes flicked up. In the rearview mirror, the reflection wasn't his. It wasn't even the double standing by the lake. It was something worse, something vast, rippling, a face made of water and shadows, eyes like bottomless wells that stretched deep into the lake's abyss. Ryan screamed and swerved, nearly driving into a tree. The image in the mirror shifted, twisting like the surface of the lake itself. And then, for a single, agonizing second, the face in the mirror grinned. The car lurched, tires spinning on loose gravel. Ryan's vision blurred with panic, but he forced himself forward, away from the lake, away from that impossible grin. The road twisted through the trees, headlights cutting through black. He didn't dare look in the mirror again. But the whispers followed him, crawling up from the floorboards, seeping from the air vents, bubbling under his skin. The lake was inside him now. Ryan drove like a madman, the tires shrieking around curves, gravel spitting behind him in a storm. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and sweat stung his eyes. The air inside the car felt wet, humid, like the inside of a greenhouse. Every breath tasted faintly of algae, as though the lake had followed him inside. He dared not glance at the rearview mirror again, though the urge gnawed at him like a compulsion. Some part of him needed to look, to confirm whether the monstrous grin was still waiting. He kept his eyes locked forward, whispering broken prayers through his teeth. The road stretched endlessly, winding through thick woods that seemed darker than before. His headlights barely touched the trees, swallowed by a blackness too dense to be natural. It felt as though the night itself leaned in to watch. Ryan's chest heaved, his heart slamming hard enough that his ribs ached, yet beneath the panic something colder pressed in, a weight not entirely his own. It was in his veins, in the back of his skull. A memory that didn't belong to him flickered behind his eyes, a man stumbling into the lake a century ago, his reflection pulling him under while his screams shattered the silence. Ryan saw it, felt it, as if it had been him. He gritted his teeth and shook his head violently. "No," he growled, slapping the steering wheel. "You're not me. You're not," his voice cracked. He realized, with icy dread, that the memory had felt more solid than his own past week. His reflection wasn't just trying to replace him, it was erasing him. A shape loomed in the distance, and Ryan's stomach lurched. A cabin stood just off the road, crooked and weathered, the wood blackened by age and damp. The windows glimmered faintly in his headlights, though no lamps burned within. Something about the place drew him with the inevitability of gravity. His foot lifted from the gas pedal, almost without permission, and before he realized it he was pulling into the overgrown path that served as a driveway. The car idled as Ryan sat frozen, staring at the cabin. The whispers were louder here, hissing in his ears, echoing against his bones. He didn't want to go inside. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to drive until the tank ran dry. But his hand was already reaching for the door handle, trembling as though guided by someone else's will. The night swallowed him the moment he stepped out. The air smelled of mildew and stagnant water. The grass crunched like brittle bones under his boots. Ryan forced himself forward, each step heavy, the cabin seeming to breathe in the dark. Its door hung crooked, swollen with rot, yet it creaked open at his touch as though it had been waiting. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with mold and something older, like a grave that had been disturbed. Moonlight leaked through a cracked window, enough to illuminate the clutter within. Shelves sagged with jars clouded by murky liquid. A table sat against the wall, papers scattered across it, their ink smeared and water-stained. And then Ryan saw them. Photographs. Dozens of them. They were pinned haphazardly to the walls, curling with damp, their edges blackened by mildew. Ryan stepped closer, his skin crawling as he realized they were portraits. Men, women, children, faces stiff and formal, all staring into the camera with lifeless eyes. But it wasn't just their stillness that chilled him. Each photo had something wrong with the reflection. A mirror, a window, even water in the background, always, the reflection smiled, while the subject did not. Ryan staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His gaze fell to a photo near the bottom of the wall, newer than the others, the edges less faded. His lungs seized. It was him. Or at least, someone who looked exactly like him. Standing by the lake, face grim and pale. But in the water behind him, the reflection grinned with teeth too sharp, eyes too wide. His stomach dropped. The photographs weren't just records. They were warnings. Every one of those people had stood where he was now. And every one had been taken. The whispers surged louder, until they filled his head with a chorus of wet voices. He staggered toward the table, grabbing one of the scattered papers. The handwriting was frantic, smeared, written in long vertical slashes that carved deep into the page. He forced his eyes across the words. The lake is a mouth. The reflections are its tongue. It feeds on us through them. Do not look too long. Do not let it touch your shadow. It will not stop. It will never stop. And once it marks you, you are already gone. The paper slipped from his trembling hands. He pressed his palms to his skull, as if he could block out the voices. But they weren't just whispering anymore. They were chanting. His name. Over and over, bubbling from the walls, from the photographs, from the wet blackwood itself. Ryan. 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 The door slammed behind him with a violent crack. Ryan spun, his breath seizing in his throat. The room had darkened. The photographs trembled on the walls, their faces warping, mouths stretching into wide grins that split too far. The glass in the frames bulged outward, as if something pressed from behind, eager to crawl free. Ryan stumbled back toward the table, fumbling for the crowbar he'd tucked at his side earlier. But his eyes snagged on the window across the room. His heart plummeted. In the reflection of the glass, he wasn't standing alone. Behind him, impossibly tall, a figure loomed. Its face was his, stretched thin and dripping with black water, its grin wide enough to split the skull. And slowly, horribly, its hand lifted in the reflection, reaching for his shoulder. Ryan whirled around, swinging the crowbar with all his strength. Nothing was there. Only shadows. But when his gaze snapped back to the window, the reflection had closed the gap. Its hand was now touching his shoulder in the glass. And Ryan felt something cold and wet press against his skin. Ryan's scream never fully escaped his throat. It was strangled by the icy pressure gripping his shoulder, seeping through fabric and skin as though the hand in the reflection were sliding into him. He thrashed, swinging the crowbar wildly, shattering the glass of the window in a spray of shards. For a moment the touch vanished, and he staggered back, gasping, his chest heaving like a bellows. But the relief was an illusion. The broken shards glittered across the floorboards, and in every piece of glass, he still stood. Each reflection twisted and multiplied, and in each one, his double smiled wider, closer, more real. Some pieces showed its eyes glowing faintly, others revealed its jaw slack and unhinged, rows of needle-sharp teeth glistening with lake water. He stumbled away from them, horrified, but no matter where he looked, the grinning faces followed. The whispers crescendoed into a roar. The walls pulsed as if the cabin itself were breathing, groaning with the weight of 100 unseen lungs. The photographs rattled in their frames, and from their water-stained depths the smiles stretched and shifted, the subject's eyes flicking to him. The air stank of wet earth and rot. Ryan clutched the crowbar to his chest and bolted for the door. It wouldn't budge. He slammed against it with his shoulder, wood splintering but refusing to break. Behind him, a sound rose, a wet slapping, like footsteps wading through mud. He dared a glance back. His reflection was climbing out of the largest shard of glass, pushing through the surface as if it were liquid. Its body used black water, its skin too pale, too stretched, its movements jerky yet deliberate. And its eyes, those wide, gleaming eyes, fixed on him with unbearable hunger. "No, no, you're not real," Ryan choked, though the words sounded weak, hollow. He swung the crowbar as the thing lunged forward. The metal connected with its head, sinking deeper than it should have, as though striking mud instead of bone. The figure didn't falter. It leaned close, pressing its drenched face inches from his. And then it spoke, its voice a perfect echo of his own, only deeper, wetter, bubbling like something drowning. "You were mine the moment you looked too long." Ryan shoved it back, ripping free and slamming the crowbar again and again. Black liquid sprayed across the cabin, splattering the photographs, soaking the wood. But each blow only seemed to make it stronger. The more he struck, the more real it became, its body thickening, solidifying with each spatter of inky fluid. He staggered back, heart hammering, lungs searing with every breath. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the papers strewn across the table. His mind scrambled to recall the frantic scrawl he'd read earlier, "Do not let it touch your shadow." Ryan's gaze dropped to the floor. The lantern light from the broken window cast long, quivering shadows. His shadow stretched behind him, trembling across the warped wood. And the reflection's shadow, oh God, it was touching his. Fingers long and skeletal pressed into the outline of his shoulder. The instant their shadows touched, agony ripped through him. His body convulsed as if his veins were full of ice. He felt something pulling at him, not his flesh, but his self. Memories tore loose, his mother's face, the smell of his father's garage, the warmth of sunlight on his skin. They ripped away like pages from a book, fluttering into the dark. The reflection leaned closer, opening its mouth impossibly wide, inhaling as though sucking him out. "No!" Ryan roared, using the last of his strength. He flung himself sideways, hurling the crowbar into the lantern. Flames roared instantly, licking across the soaked floorboards, devouring the paper, the photographs, the oozing black fluid. The cabin filled with firelight, shadows twisting and writhing. The reflection shrieked, a sound not human, not animal, but the screech of water boiling. It staggered back, its body bubbling, blisters of steam erupting across its skin. Ryan crawled for the door, coughing, lungs seared by smoke. He threw his shoulder into it one last time. The wood cracked, splintered, and gave way. He spilled out into the night, rolling onto the cold, wet grass. The cabin blazed behind him, flames tearing upward, sparks drifting into the black sky. The whispers howled, not in his ears but in the earth itself, furious and hungry. Ryan scrambled to his feet and ran. The trees clawed at him, branches slapping his face, tearing his shirt, but he didn't stop. His only thought was escape, distance, light. At last he burst through the treeline, stumbling onto the gravel road where his car still idled, headlights weakly cutting through smoke. He collapsed against it, chest heaving, heart pounding. For a long moment he just knelt there, gulping air, watching the glow of the fire through the trees. The cabin's roof caved with a roar, sparks spiraling high, the sound like a dying beast. Slowly, mercifully, the whispers began to fade. Ryan climbed into the car, hands trembling as he gripped the wheel. He didn't dare look at the mirrors. He started the engine and drove, tires spitting gravel, eyes locked on the road. The night seemed lighter now, the trees thinner, the sky tinged faintly with gray. Dawn was approaching. He whispered to himself, "It's over. It's over." But as the horizon began to glow, he caught it, just for a second, out of the corner of his eye. In the glass of the rearview mirror, his reflection did not match him. While his lips trembled with exhaustion and fear, the reflection's mouth curled slowly, deliberately, into a smile. And this time, it didn't fade.